Morning, West Ridge.
Morning.
I just can't put you down. For those of you that are new to West Ridge, you need to know I'm quite a big deal. I'm really not, but you are. I was thinking this week, what makes West Ridge my favorite place to speak ever, of all time? And I came to the conclusion that it was because I could be authentic and transparent here without fear of retribution. At least about 75% transparent and authentic. Most churches couldn't take 25% of the unfiltered Gordon. And that says a lot about you. And I try to be authentic and transparent when I speak by bringing my life circumstances into the room and putting it against a biblical worldview. Not in a narcissistic, pseudo-psychotherapeutic way, but with the belief that the human condition is common to all of us. And if I'm going through this, if I'm seeing this, chances are maybe one or two of you are as well. And so that's where we start today. This is what I'm going through. Lots of changes. Lots of changes. We sold our beloved West Loop condo, where we lived 12 and a half years, and from which I drove out to West Ridge most of those years, every time change Sunday, every holiday, every snowstorm, to speak. And we moved to St. Louis in November. That's St. Louis, Missouri. Now, I don't want to offend anyone from St. Louis. But depending on who's doing the study, St. Louis or Detroit are the most violent city in America. I'm talking about the city of St. Louis. That's just a demographic fact. In fact, I saw one list where St. Louis is one of 4 U.S. cities on the 50 most dangerous cities in the world. So we sold our condo, we moved to St. Louis, and I started to work for a large faith-based nonprofit senior health care ministry. We run retirement homes, retirement communities, 13 in 4 states. Just don't come up afterwards and say, "How's the nursing home doing?" We don't say that anymore. So we sold our condo, we moved to St. Louis. I went to work for a retirement community. And I guess maybe you're interested in how that's going. Thanks so much. Well, I live in the most dangerous city in America. I work for an organization you don't want to talk about, think about, and pray every night you won't end up in. I'm your martyr. But wait, there's more changes. I bought a new car for the first time in 12 years. Who knew cars had changed so much in 12 years? I was bragging to a friend about my new car, and I said, you know, the outside rearview mirrors, I actually defrost also. When you push the button, he goes, "Yeah, they've had that for a long time." This one even reads my texts to me. How crazy is that? I also bought a new TV for the first time in a decade. This one's a smart TV. My kids were aghast that I didn't have Netflix. And I said I got tired of mailing the DVDs back and forth. Any of you going through changes? Today, the velocity of change has changed. So I got a few quotes for you. One great philosopher said, "Time may change me, but I can't trace time." Now, I have no idea what that means, but I just like David Bowie. So I'd throw that in there for you. Another philosopher says, "Life belongs to the living, and he who lives must be prepared for changes." And here's what one artist has to say, one of my favorites: "I have to change to stay the same." Turns out, One of the major themes in the Bible is change. The God who never changes requires from me constant change. The God who is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow promises me that I don't have to be the same tomorrow as I was yesterday or I am today. And Christians of all people should be the ones who embrace change, who lean into change. But too often the American church has been the number one organization that's been change resistant. I don't want to get off on a rant there, unless you want me to. So I want to suggest 3 game-changing attitudes about the change in your life. Because if you're not going through change right now, just wait. Game-changing attitude number 1 is life is a faith adventure. That's learning to fly. And this is an unlikely verse for this attitude, but let me read it to you anyway. It says, "Continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it's God who works in you to will and to act according to His good will." Peterson substitutes the word reverent and sensitive for fear and trembling. And I think that's a better translation. Working out your salvation assumes that there's a process going on inside you, right? That you're changing. Fear and trembling doesn't mean we walk around quaking in our boots. It means that life is a faith adventure, and in that adventure there are risks that we have to take. So therefore, I do well not to have an arrogant attitude. I do better to have a reverent and sensitive attitude about the changes in my life. And risks are hard for those of us who think too much. And yet, the really important decisions in life, they have to be made without much certainty, really. If you allow yourself to think about it. Choosing a career, changing a career, choosing a spouse, choosing a church home, when to buy, when to sell, when to leave, what to leave in, what to leave out, when to work for a nursing home in America's most dangerous city. It's really only after decisions are made do we have any sense as whether or not we have chosen as we should, and even then, things could change in a moment. Maybe that's why the Bible talks so much about faith. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. And I want to tell you here today, it's not too late to change your attitude in any one of these areas I'm talking to you about. A reverent and sensitive attitude keeps me from ever assuming that I've arrived and I have no more to learn, and I have no one else to learn from. Keeps me from assuming I've made it on my own, and I no longer need God's grace in my life. One author defines faith as the decision to keep your eyes open. Open to the possibility of growth and change and the next gift that God wants to give me, even though at the time it may not look like a gift. How many exciting opportunities have we missed because we walked around through life with our eyes closed? I don't ever presume at any time that I'm in complete control, because things can change in a moment. Jesus even told a parable about a presumptuous businessman. He'd had a good year. Profits were up. Costs were down. He had the world by the tail. The only problem this man had was to find enough time to spend all of his money that he's accumulated. And he said to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." And then he said, "This is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and I'll build bigger ones. And there I'll store all my grain and my goods. And I'll say to myself, you've plenty of good things, and they're laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you, and then who'll get what you've prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself, but is not rich toward God." Game-changing attitude number 2. Failures aren't fatal. Rather than a failure-proof career path handed down to us from God, He walks alongside us. He dialogues with us. And at different points in the journey, we're directed to let go of old plans and embrace new challenges. And what I've learned in this change point in my life is that sometimes you have to let go and say no to good things. I love coming out here and teaching, but it was time to say no. I love going to New York City and teaching my class there 2 or 3 times a year. But it was time to say no. And all that's predicated on a maxim I've pretty much lived my life by, and that is the time to change is before you have to change, as painful as it is at that inflection point. The good news is, even if I do end up making some stupid mistakes, I know that's not the end of the world for me because I live by grace. The Bible doesn't portray God as walking alongside us as a leering boss who's only interested in more productivity. Our God is a God of new beginnings. And He never leaves me with the sense that it's too late to try something new. In fact, the Bible is full of character sketches from Abraham to Peter who acted boldly and frequently made mistakes. I mean, you just look at some of the famous characters of the Bible. There's Moses, the great lawgiver. Oh, he also murdered someone. There's David, a man after God's own heart. Oh, he committed adultery and then he killed her husband. There's the Apostle Paul, early in his days, who would murder people following Christ. Makes me feel better about living in St. Louis when I think about those kinds of things. What all those characters have in common with us is that when they did fail, they didn't give up on the fact that God didn't give up on them. Sometimes I give up on myself. But I have to cling tenaciously to the belief that God has not yet given up on me. Attitude number 3. There'll be a time when you run out of change. I wish I could tell you every change in your life was going to be better than the last. But that's not what the gospel teaches. I wish I could tell you that. Here's what the Bible promises us about change. But let me tell you something wonderful. A mystery I'll probably never fully understand. I was reading this passage this week and I thought, you know what? In my 20 years of ministry, I wish I'd said, I don't fully understand this more often, instead of trying to be the Bible answer man. Just said, they stumped me on this one. This is the Apostle Paul writing. We're not all going to die, but we're all going to be changed. You hear a blast, end all blast from a trumpet, and in the time that you look up and blink your eyes, it's over. On signal from that trumpet from heaven, the dead will be up and out of their graves beyond the reach of death, never to die again. At the same moment, in the same way, will be changed. As is typical in my message, I only pick one word for you to memorize. And some of you have forgotten that already. In the resurrection scheme of things, this has to happen. Everything perishable taken off the shelves and replaced by the imperishable, this mortal replaced by the immortal. I'm looking forward to that change. And because of that change, I can have hope in the midst of an onslaught of changes I'd rather not go through right now. My challenge is to move through the changes between now and then with a little grace. That's about the best I can do sometimes. In this stressed and strained and dog-eat-dog world of accelerated change and unforgiving competition where social, economic, political institutions are being shuffled and rearranged, have you noticed? It's a general shock to the system. Why are we surprised that one of the world's most successful movies is about the world's most famous shipwreck? The metaphor of rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic was in circulation long before the movie. Who among us is not shaken at some point in our life due to the very ground beneath us seemingly coming apart? But because of my faith in the final change, I can move through the roller coaster changes in this life and know that things are going to change until they aren't. Thomas Dorsey was a gospel songwriter, and he was singing in St. Louis when it was much safer. And he learned this lesson, that things can change in a moment. The young married music pastor of the Pilgrim Baptist Church in Chicago's Bronzeville neighborhood was handed a telegram that said, "Your wife is dead." The place was packed. People were singing and dancing. They were asking for more. But he'd just been handed the shock of his life. He'd left her back home in her last month of pregnancy, and the last look on her face was a peaceful look of sound sleep. All seemed well. But now everything was coming apart, and quickly, and without advance notice. Hastily, Thomas clambered back to Chicago. He entered her room and found her. She'd given birth to a son, but within a day, he died too. Both were buried in the same casket. Thomas fell apart in his soul. Where's God? This was too much pain. And yet, the following Saturday, he meandered close to a piano. He sat down and he started to fiddle with the keys. It was nothing he'd gone over before. The words were fresh. The melody simply appearing and then flowing from a burdened, questing heart in search of Jesus. Precious Lord, can you take my hand? Lead me on. Let me stand. I'm tired. I'm weak. I'm worn. Through the storm and through the night, lead me to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord. Lead me home. I would add to the time when there'll be no more change. Because this one knocked me off my feet. He told a friend afterward, "And so I go living for God, willingly and joyfully until that day when He will take my hand and gently lead me home." Don't miss out on the gifts that God wants to give you because you had your eyes closed on this faith journey. And when you encounter failure, tell yourself we have a God of new beginnings. And things could change in a moment. And when the velocity of change and types of change seem to swirl around you like white water, remember there's a day coming when you'll run out of change. That's the essence of the gospel. Like Thomas Dorsey, we can sing his simple prayer, "Take my hand, precious Lord. Lead me home." You can do that today. You can do that right now. It's an attitude of reverence and sensitivity. It's an expression of eyes open journey. Two things I know about our future. Things are going to change, and the last change is the best change. And I'll add my own prayer. Lord, help me to move through the changes of this life with a little grace until the time when I run out of change.